Welcome back to our next panel on deep sea mining, tailing ponds, and mercury in the Amazon, ramifications of mining gold, diamonds, and gems on our world's water, or as I've been referring to it, the water panel. This is such an important topic, and it doesn't get enough attention in the jewelry industry, in industry at large, or in fact at the recent COP26. Water has such profound implications for all of life on the planet, and yet we seem to take it very much for granted. Oh, there's so much of it, and it's right there. We worry when it doesn't rain, but we don't really worry about the water itself, and this is something we need to change. So my guests for this panel are Bronwen Currie, who is an independent marine biologist in Namibia, Marcelo Oliveira, Senior Program Manager with World Wildlife Federation in Brazil, and Daniel Franks, who's the a professor in the Sustainable Minerals Institute at the University of Queensland. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thanks for having us.
So our goals for this panel are twofold. The first is to create awareness around the various ways water supplies are contaminated by mining activities and how those risks affect the immediate communities dependent on that specific water body, but also all of us in the world. And the second goal is to rally our community around the opportunities that currently exist to, in the case of deep sea or seabed mining, possibly halt or at least slow down the action of sea mining until the impacts are better understood. And to also rally around ongoing efforts to protect other water bodies from things like mercury that are in the water. So there's opportunity for action here and we want to take it. What we're going to do is start with just a short presentation by each of our speakers, and then we'll open it up for larger conversation. And I encourage everyone to put questions in the Q&A tab of the conversations box on your screen. We have these experts here. They are coming in at 6 a.m. on Daniel's side and midnight on Bronwen's side. They bring Marcelo. I'm not gonna feel bad for you. It's not that late there, right? But they're here to share their deep knowledge on these topics, and I want to get as many questions to them as we possibly can. So let's start with you, Marcelo. I'll get your screens up on the slide, and perhaps you can share with us your initial presentation. You can go ahead and start talking while I get the screen share up if you like.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity of being here. I'm going to spend some of our minutes talking about the gold mining in the Amazon. So as you can see, although being a very poison element, this is how people have handled mercury in the Amazon. And although being naturally occurring element in the Amazon, the human activities have increased total atmospheric mercury concentration by about 450% above natural levels. And in Latin America, artisanal small scale gold mining is the main source of it. Next, please, Andrea. Increased gold price in the global market, the pandemic, and the political instability boosted the illegal gold mining in the Brazilian Amazon. We estimate around 200,000 white-cap gold miners spread in the Amazon. It has become a security issue once violence and corruption are central in these networks. This picture shows the Serra Pelada, that was the famous mine site in Amazon in the 80s. Next, please. So the Amazon, one of the last and most important tropical forests on Earth, are threatened by illegal gold mining. I do not call small-scale gold mining anymore. Once have equipment and sophisticated networks using airplanes and spending millions on operations are behind this activity. Beautiful landscapes like this one are turning into this extreme. This next one, please, Andrea, and this So look what we're doing to our natural resources, to water. This used to be a river that many people relied on in within an indigenous land, which is the Munduruku indigenous land. And this is how the process happens. From 2010 to 2020, the area occupied by mining inside indigenous lands grew almost 500%. The Yanomami area degraded by miners are equivalent to 1 million Maracanãs stadiums. In 2020, the illegal mining deforestation reached 100,000 square kilometers. Next, please. As I said before, this can be considered small scale anymore. These operations use large dredging vessels like this one that cost up to $250,000. Or next one, heavy machinery such this one apprehended during a federal operation in indigenous land. From 2019 to 2020, it is estimated that commercialization of 174 tons of gold, a third with evidence of irregularities, causing a social environmental damage to the place. Next, please. And these are the front line in the Amazons. The areas, these are the Yanomami people, indigenous. The area effectively protects habitats, water, and biodiversity, even though they are the most vulnerable and have been poisoned throughout the last 4 decades. And I recommend you to watch the movie The Last Forest, available on Netflix, that tells this story. Please have a look. These people has been contaminated by consuming one of the most important protein source for them, fish. And the main contamination route is through bioaccumulation and bioaccumulation of methyl mercury from fish consumption, which risks the food security and livelihoods of these people. Next, please. Look how important fish are on their diet. Is the main protein source, indeed. And however, many studies we have been conducting here have shown alarming levels of mercury on this fish. And we learned that it's important also to include studies on urban areas that might be impacted as well, where people also relies on fish. Next. So instead of finding these beautiful and healthy kids in the forest, it's getting more and more common to meet children like this one. Yes, very, very sad. This young indigenous girl who has cerebral palsy. She's a Mandaruku who born close to a golden mine site. We believe around 200 kids were impaired by gold mining in the same tribe, the community. Maternal mercury contamination has been associated with a series of developmental effects, and during childhood, it may cause several chronic disorders carried out throughout life. So, mercury contamination is responsible for a variety of important health problems, including harm to the neurological, cardiovascular, immunological, and digestive systems, as well as effects on lungs, kidneys, skins, and eyes. There's more. Please, next. Aquatic mammals, notably those species we consider bioindicators, have been contaminated as well. These are the river dolphins that inhabit the Amazon biome, and we have collect samples, tissue samples from animals in Bolivia, Brazil, and Colombia, and most of them have shown high levels of mercury. Unfortunately, we don't have research showing what are the effects, but considering they are mammals, something not good that might happen with them. And this is also very critical. The highest mercury level ever recorded for a wildlife species was for jaguars here in the border between the Amazon and Pantanal. Next, please. Finally, I finished saying that there's still hope. A few months ago, we launched the Mercury Observatory, a platform that compiles most of the knowledge regarding mercury contamination in the Amazon. We believe that improving transparency and engaging key stakeholders, as we are doing now, uh, are a successful way of reversing this situation. That's it. Thank you very much.
All right, next I will share Bronwen's presentation. Let me get back up to the first, and there we go, Bronwen. Perhaps you can give us just an introduction to your area of expertise.
All right. Good day to everybody. I should be saying good night from here. So I'm going to talk about the prospect of deep sea mining, which hasn't actually started anywhere yet. Deep sea mining being defined as mining in water depths of greater than 200 meters. So when we are thinking about embarking on such an industry, really we need to think ahead and how this will affect our planet in years to come. Of course, deep sea mining has been we can go on to the next one, thanks. The seabed is just chock full of minerals, just as on land, and many people regard it as having more supplies here. Here is just a map outlining some of the places, but it will give you an idea of the sort of minerals that are being targeted in all oceans of the world and in all places. This is for some of them only, the cobalt crusts and the sulfides and the manganese nodules, and there's lots more. So I'm showing this just to give you an idea of if mining should start. It will lead on to more and more. Once it's started, it will be really difficult to stop or to confine to certain places only. And we must really think ahead about what might be done to our oceans if deep sea mining were to be allowed. Thanks, the next one. So to date, and deep sea mining has been spoken of in the last decade very heavily, and even more so at the moment. There's everybody who wants to do deep sea mining is jumping on the bandwagon because there's this outcry for more of these rare earth elements and minerals and metals that are required for technology and for putting into the new style cars and to combat climate change with the technology that is needed for that. But what they have looked at to date is only the sea floor and the animals on the sea floor, and completely ignoring the vast amounts of seawater that they have to work through and work with. And this seawater is full of life. Most people think of the ocean, and I know this is a very abstract, I'm a marine biologist, so this is my world, but it definitely isn't your world's. And it's an extremely intricate ecosystem that works in the ocean. Also, we must realize that the ocean is never still. The currents are moving everywhere, and it's full of life. It's absolutely full of life. Even a small drop of seawater has got hundreds and thousands and millions of microbes in it, not to mention the very small forms that all lead to an intricate food web in the ocean. So to think of the ocean as just water is really not right. It's a whole biome that we are all very, very reliant of. It's a whole support system for our planet. And if deep sea mining were to go ahead, much more attention must be given to what will happen to this water mass that is so essential to our lives. From the plumes from the mining that are formed, both from excavation at the bottom and from dewatering and possibly from processing of the mined ore. Next one, please. So to just borrow a slide from other people and imagine we were fish in the water, there's every aspect that could be affecting the way these animals in the water go about their life. There's all the visual communications that could be affected by these sediment plumes. There's the interactions, there's the reproduction, there's the contamination, which I really want to deal with here. Many of the very fine particles that are brought into the water during mining attract heavy metals, and one must realize that a lot of the animals living in the water don't feed selectively. They simply filter feed the particles, and these can slowly get into the food chain and lead to contamination. Not necessarily to death, but they can certainly affect the condition of the animals, and this can slowly build up over generations before it becomes apparent in perhaps contaminating seafood. We've heard just in this last presentation how serious it can get when mercury builds up to high levels. Well, in the ocean, exactly the same thing can take place, not from one or two mining activities, but if seabed mining should start and go ahead, it will be far too late to discover this sort of contamination, which really, really is serious, being aware that so much food is produced from the ocean, as well as other life forms. So we really need to look at the effects on the water column. And these, of course, are really, we must be aware that mining in the ocean, thanks, the next one, the next slide there, that mining in the sea is so vastly different to land mining, and we have to look at different things. The liquid, which is so obvious it's in liquid, but it has a whole lot of implications, and that is that it's moving and it's going all over the world. And I think a very good example of that is what we've seen with plastic pollution. It's not necessarily the source, but it's spread from one part of the world to the other. And we even know that these microplastics are found all over the world. It's been publicized so widely. That's why I use it as an example to the audience. But the same thing can happen with contaminants that are brought into the ocean, and they should not be dispersed so widely. It's mobile. The ocean is never still, and there are currents moving the stuff around in different directions all the time. It's really totally impossible to confine the impacts of mining. On land, we do have efforts to confine them to tailings ponds and this sort of thing. You just cannot do that in the ocean. So they're going to be spread around, and also we've got all the swimmers that are spreading them around as well. So we really will take a long time before we see any problems building up in the ocean due to contamination from mining. And bear in mind that the fish that are caught, perhaps commercially, will often take 6 years and more to reach adulthood, and only then will the effects be really observed or measured as to what could have gone wrong. So we need to think ahead in all these. These are the very obvious parts. The food webs in the ocean are very intricate. I'm not going to go on about that now, but they are very intricate, and there is this possibility of really affecting the life in the ocean that we are so dependent on. We should also be aware that the ocean provides our entire support system. It supplies more than half the oxygen we breathe, and this is not from the water. This, of course, is from all those little organisms in the ocean. It also takes up a huge amount of carbon dioxide, and it sequesters more of this carbon in the seabed sediments. So this, amongst other things, it provides food, it helps control the heat in the atmosphere. These are all services provided from the ocean that we just accept, we take as normal, and we don't really appreciate and learn to conserve and care for the ocean. Next one, please. It's also extremely difficult out there in the deep ocean to ever know what's really going on until the consequences are severe and can be measured. It's not like on land. We can't go and see what's going on if a deep sea mining activity is going on. This is going on sometimes thousands of meters below the surface, out in the big blue. And really, it's all very well to theoretically say stop it if things go wrong, but that is not possible, not at present, and it will certainly take a lot of monitoring. Working out at sea is very, very expensive. So we cannot have all these monitoring systems and act in a cowboy fashion and say, well, let's try it and see what happens, because by then it will be far too late to ever rectify it. Next one. So this has given a lot of concern to scientists, but governments alike throughout the world, and they have been really hesitant to give the okay to go ahead with seabed mining. It's not just a handful of concerned scientists. This has led up to a very hot topic. And there is a high-level panel looking at sustainable ocean economy. And one of the decisions they have made is that until the need for more knowledge, until this need for more knowledge of what the impacts from deep sea mining will be, that there really a strong precautionary approach should be taken. And it does not really fit. We've all heard, I'm sure, the buzzword about blue economy. It does not really fit into the context of a sustainable blue economy. So that extreme precaution is being advised, and many countries have imposed moratoria and outright bans on seabed mining at the moment until more knowledge is available. Now, how does this affect the jewelry manufacture? Of course, some of the materials that are used for jewelry fall into this list of metals that will be provided, but I think we should keep an eye on where these minerals come from, where these metals come from before going ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Bronwen. Okay, Daniel, you're up. Let's get yet another perspective on water here.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you today. It's really great to be talking about the relationship between environment, water, and minerals. I'm going to talk about tailings. For those that don't know or are unfamiliar with the concept, tailings are the ground up rock that is left over after mineral processing. And the composition of tailings, or what makes them up, varies depending on the type of ore body being mined. Mostly tailings are an issue for the large scale mining sector. In artisanal small scale mining, mostly the miners are mining placer deposits. So tailings is not specifically generated. So most of what I'm going to talk about is relevant for large scale and mid-sized mining that use mechanized processes. Tailings, they're typically disposed of in a storage facility. Sometimes that's known as a dam or a pond, but these are not like normal dams. They're mostly made up of ground up rock, but they can sometimes have a pond of water on the surface. Most of the rock mined for metals will actually become waste. So metal ores that are mined to create jewelry typically contain only a very, very small amount of metals in. So ore mined for gold might contain as little as 5 grams for each ton of rock that it's mined. So, the vast majority of that is going to become mineral waste. So an 18-karat gold ring would be responsible for around 20 to 30 ton of mineral waste. And that you can obviously recycle gold a lot, and the vast majority of gold ever mined is still in use. So that recycling will over time reduce the amount of waste that's responsible for each person that has a piece of jewelry, of course. Now, there's two main problems with tailings that I wanted to share with you today. The first problem's caused when tailings storage facilities collapse. Tailings facility failures, they're pretty rare, but they're not rare enough. So they average more than one major failure per year. And when those facilities collapse, that ground up rock, it can actually liquefy. It moves so quickly that it acts like water. It travels downstream very quickly. You can overwhelm those ecosystems with the sediment, and it can also mobilize metals and trace elements that might be in the tailings into ecosystems and cause major and sometimes catastrophic damage. You might have heard recently there was a failure in Brazil a few years ago, which took the lives of 270 people, mainly mine workers that were in a cafeteria, a canteen, having lunch. So the scale of the problem, each year the world produces 13 billion tonne of tailings. That's an average of 1.7 tonne per person per year. So each of us is responsible for at least 1.7 tonne per person per year. This tailings is stored in around 3,400 active tailings storage facilities. The jewelry industry is responsible for 1.1 billion tonnes of this 13 billion tonnes. And if you think about that as kind of representing the volume, it would be 332,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools of waste produced each year by the jewelry industry. And that is currently stored for the jewelry industry in 268 facilities. So 1 in 10 facilities have actually reported a stability issue during the life of the facility. We published recently in one of the Nature journals called Scientific Reports, a major study on the stability of tailings. The most common type of tailings storage facility is called an upstream facility, where each successive raise is built on some of the tailings of the past disposed material. And in fact, 1 in 5 of these type of facilities have reported a stability issue. And if you look at the 260 facilities that represent the jewelry sector, so gold, silver, platinum, diamonds, 26 of those facilities have reported a past stability issue. So the second main problem with tailings is called acid and metalliferous drainage. So the leftover sulfide minerals in the ground up rock, so the metals are usually associated with these sulfide minerals. So those leftover sulfide minerals, they can break down in kind of the superficial environment where there's oxygen and water and it's a bit warmer. And they can mobilize metals and other elements into groundwater and surface water. And these metals may drain out the front or toe of the dam, or if that tailings is released into the environment, the metals can drain just straight into the ecosystems. When that drainage starts, it can be really difficult to control. To give you an example, mining waste in the Rio Tinto River in Spain is still polluting there from mining undertaken in Roman times. And yes, that's the same Rio Tinto that the major mining company Rio Tinto is named after that river. Rio Tinto in Spanish meaning tainted river. And so that's a bit of a summary of the two main issues with tailings being their storage and potential facility collapse, and the mobilization of metals that can happen into waterways from that ground up rock.
Okay, thank you. Let me bring our other speakers back on in the center stage. There we go. So there's a lot of discussion already happening in the chats. We've got a combination of people who are already familiar and people who are newly appalled. And that's good. I mentioned at the beginning of this session that COP26 did very, very little to even address the topic of water. Though one thing they did address, and I noticed some conversation in the chat about metal as a part of green science for ongoing environmental improvement. There is a declaration on mining and energy transition for COP26. It did call out the hazards of mining and referenced deep sea mining as a risky practice, but did any of the rest of you see much more on water at COP26 than that? It just seemed like a passing reference to the green energy discussion. I haven't read all of it yet. If Mark Hanna's here, Mark, start putting notes in. He's been trying to read everything that came out as it happened. Yeah, so we have a water problem. So I guess I'll dig into some of the questions that the audience already has. I'm trying to figure out where to start because there's just so much. So one of the first questions is a curiosity around ownership, and this is looking at the deep sea mining issue, and this is likely to be more startling to people because I don't think people have really thought about deep sea mining, whereas we've been discussing mercury for a while. I do think there's less awareness of tailing ponds, and I want to come back to thousands of years of pollution perpetuated from mining activities because that was certainly new to me, and I think we really need to think about the implications of that as well. But let's do the mining question first. Christina Molly's curious about ownership and whether any country has claimed ownership of deep seabeds at this point. And does ownership of the seabed go with the international, boundaries at the surface? Like, how is that handled? We're all envisioning a giant deep seabed land grab, of course.
Do you want me to jump in on that one?
Yes, please.
Okay, so there's the national jurisdictions, the national economic zones, where a country can decide to exploit its mineral resources. But outside of that, known as the deep seas or the international waters, the mining is being controlled by the International Seabed Authority. And that is where the hot topic is, because there is a number of licensed exploration areas that have already been given out. And there is planned exploitation of a few of the places in the Clarion-Clipperton zone. And that's where most of the work has been done and is going on to date. The whole legislation for this, without going on and on about it, is decided by the Law of the Sea, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And there are all sorts of regulations, or no, not regulations, there are sections there referring to the need to preserve and look after the ocean from the environmental aspect, but also how the ownership or the equity from the mining must be awarded to all mankind, because this is seen as the property of the whole world, all mankind. And all these issues are heavily under debate at the moment and hotly debated. There's no agreement on them, although there is a proposal, one loophole that seabed mining can be started before all the proper legislation is in place. But to go back to UNCLOS, this universal law of the sea, which applies to both international waters and to national jurisdictions, that we must look after and prevent serious harm to the ocean, because it's such a, it belongs to everybody, is being debated with regard to the harm to it. So everybody has a say in this. You and I have a say in this. It's not decided by any single country. It's not really owned by any single country. And we are responsible for not harming the ocean waters collectively.
Bronwen, you mentioned the areas that are being actively explored right now. Is that referring to that contracted area on your one slide with the little yellow boxes that's off the eastern shores of Asia?
Yes. That's the Clarion-Clipperton zone, but there are other areas around the world that are being eagerly eyed. I showed you that map mainly to show you that if it was given the go-ahead by world opinion and governments to go ahead, it will be extremely difficult to then put a halt on it. And I think that is why there is such an effort now to enforce what is called the precautionary principle, which says until we have proof that it will not cause harm to our oceans, then we should hesitate, we should show caution, we should not allow it until we have absolute proof that it will not cause harm. And this is a very strong statement, the precautionary principle, and it really should be adhered to by the authorities, including the International Seabed Authority.
Bronwen, do you have any opinion or knowledge about China's ambitions in that region and whether their ambitions have more to do with what's under the water than what's adjacent to the water? Because that zone seems to be very much in the area where China seems to be expanding its influence.
They have many of the claim exploratory areas they have, as do other countries. I don't think we should focus just on China. You know, many other countries also have those claim areas.
And what about in the Arctic, where things are opening up? And I know we're debate about channel, but it's also about what's under the water.
As I said, it's everything. Everybody's after this, and this bandwagon has opened up that everybody wants to hop on because it's being given such emphasis about the need for these metals, these materials, for technology for us to survive or try and repair climate change. And I'd just like to quote something. You know, it doesn't help to destroy one habitat to try and fix a habitat that you've wrecked already. The climate change, it really doesn't solve the problem. You know, you're going from one problem to the next, and we should be looking at different options. But that has given it impetus now to try and go ahead with the deep sea mining. The actual fact is there are enough of these materials on Earth, but on land, let me say. But even during this conference, we've heard about all the problems of mining on land. And I think a lot of people think, well, if they can tuck it away and do it in the sea, that's fine. They don't have all the social problems, but we might just be creating a whole bigger problem.
Daniel, Susan Erickson saying, asking if you would speak briefly about the changes in hydrology around water from the big mines. She's referring specifically to pumping out groundwater and the implications for communities around the mines. Is that something that you've taken a look at?
Yeah, I can speak to it generally. Obviously, it varies, highly variable for each different type of mine and deposit and geographic setting that it's in. But essentially what happens is if you have an open pit or even an underground mine, you're taking away rock from that location, you're leaving a void. And so water tends to move to places where it is, under least pressure. So it'll move from the groundwater situation into the void. And so if you want to keep operating your mine, you need to pump out that water from that either the bottom of the pit or in the underground facility. So typically a mining project will have then a storage facility for that water. If it's going to discharge that water back into the environment, it will treat that water or recycle the water through its operations. So that can range from a very benign thing to, in some circumstances, it can lead to impacts on groundwater systems that are important for the ecology or community use. So it really depends on the particular circumstance of the project as to whether that's a major issue or not an issue at all.
Also, this is from Marcelo. It occurs to me as we talk about the ocean and the fact that people are concerned, like, who owns this land and is there a land grab? But we have something similar with the Amazon, where the Amazon just sprawls across so many different countries. Is that a challenge for World Wildlife Federation in trying to get these areas mapped for Mercury and show what's happening in these water bodies? And is there a lot of negotiation between the countries around that?
Yes, definitely. WWF is really worried about it. So we have been trying to influence decision makers on how to do that. But it's the political moment is not good because Bolsonaro's administration is terrible. He doesn't want to speak, or his partners, they don't want to speak. So trying to promote collaboration among Amazonian countries, it's very hard nowadays. So we have been investing on science, trying to understand what's happening that can lead us to the right way when he leaves the government, hopefully next year.
Yes, hopefully, for so many reasons. Um, you guys, the maps that you've created to identify where all of the mercury implications, those are available online, yes?
Yes, it's called Mercury Observatory. It's open, open up platform. It's going to be updated every 6 months. So we gather science produced since 1979 on mercury contamination all over the Amazon. We have been struggling to get data from some countries, for instance, Colombia, that some studies are not published, but they have as results from PhD students and so on. So we keep looking for other data, but now we can see how spread is the contamination, and even more, how can we predict where we should focus our new studies? Because if we have a layer on mining sites and a layer on contamination sites, you can see there's no studies here. So let's start studying. And even more important, how to engage health organizations to start working on mitigation, on treating that people that is contaminated.
What are the remediation efforts that are trying to be put in place in these areas that have been so damaged? And this is kind of a question for both Daniel and Marcelo, because we have failing tailing ponds and we have devastation in the Amazon from the mercury. So can you guys talk about some of the remediation?
I can start here. We have been learning a lot from the team in Peru, how to restore forests and using species that can collect mercury from the sand. So it's in a very initial stage, recovering. But I think the most important thing is to do a better mapping on the impacts and to get the governments engaged on attending those people that are affected and finish the use of mercury in those areas, because it stays for 100 years in the chain. So it's time to stop using mercury.
It's such as a problem, it's really challenging because the Amazon has so much effect on the rest of the world, but we don't have a law of the seas that says it's for the benefit of the whole world. So each individual government with Amazon land has its own discretion about how to treat its land. It's so we're left with some various types of international pressure and then just hoping that they buy into the science, right?
And also the market. I think market can make some pressure over the governments. If you don't do your part, let's pressure the government and get this done.
Yeah, but you're right. So the market is really where we can bring a lot of pressure to bear. That's really the same in, well, it's true for deep sea mining too. We can say we simply don't want diamonds from the seafloor and bring tremendous pressure that way. We'd have to get industrial diamonds to jump on board with that. But so Daniel, remediation for tailing ponds.
Yeah, I was going to add on the mercury issue. I mean, there has been a fair bit of attention on mercury for some time because of the Minamata Convention, which came out of the United Nations Environment Assembly. And that has led to quite a bit of capacity building that's now happening with artisanal small-scale miners to shift away from gold mining that includes mercury as part of its process to styles of processing that doesn't. And so there is a global program on that includes funding from Jeff that is really working with small-scale miners to transition out of those practices and capacity building, because a lot of those small-scale miners and artisanal miners that do operate in gold are doing it in circumstances of poverty. I mean, Marcelo mentioned earlier that there's some more sophisticated and well-funded miners out there, but a large majority of the miners mining gold are artisanal and small-scale miners that are working in circumstances of poverty. So their human development transformation is a way to get that environmental transformation. And so there are things happening in that front. In terms of large-scale mining, There's a few different things happening. First, as a result of some of the big tailings facility failures recently, there's a new international standard that was developed by the United Nations Environment Programme, some of the green finance groups represented by the Principles on Responsible Investment, and the major International Association of the Large-Scale Mining Community, ICMM. So they came together and produced a new standard. That standard would, if implemented, increase or decrease the risks around tailings, but it's such a huge problem, tailings. So whether the mining industry in total takes up this standard is one question, but even beyond that, there's so many issues to think through. There's also some new technology in the tailings space that would be drastically reduce risks of failure. It's called dry stacking. It's basically to remove the water from tails and then stack it rather than put it in a tailing storage facility. And that technology is more stable from a geotechnical perspective, but it also then has less potential to mobilize those metals into the environment as well. The problem is that there's not that many companies that have taken up this new technology. One of the major mining companies represents like 82% of all of these dry stack facilities. So, the question is, do we want the industry to use this new technology? And if so, then there needs to be some pressure points on the industry to adopt it, because it does have some throughput issues. It means that you can't have as much mining as quickly, at least at the moment. And it also is adding an additional expense. So if we want to see these changes, we have to be willing to pay more for the metal that comes from mining, because at the moment it's race to the bottom to produce the cheapest metal that's possible.
Which is harkens back to our last conversation of the day yesterday, that when we want cheap goods, we're basically endorsing exploitation of people, exploitation of resources, but the drive for cheaper goods is an acceptance of that. It's interesting. Can you recite that statistic again that you shared with us about Rio Tinto?
Yeah, so Rio Tinto is a region in Spain. It's a river catchment. The Romans mined there, and in mining that material, those sulfides are mobilized. So sulfides are formed in deep underground in volcanic systems, right? So they're formed with low temperature, low pressure, no oxygen. So when those minerals are then exposed to the surface where it's warm, there's lots of water, there's lots of oxygen, they break down. So that region in Spain has been perpetually producing acid and metalliferous drainage and mobilizing metals into the river since that time it was mined. And it will continue to do so for thousands of years. So we're talking about perpetual water management issues with mining in a lot of circumstances. And that region is where the Rio Tinto company is named after, because the company formed out of mining much later down the track of that same area.
I think that's a powerful statistic for all of us to remember. We humans are really, really bad at thinking about the future. We'd rather do what we want right now. So if we can all hold on to that statistic and share it, it at least applies some context to the choices that we make today when it comes to mining and water. Let's see, we've got a couple of other questions in the chat. This one is for Bronwen. Could you speak to how different the environmental concerns of deep sea mining are? Actually, it may not be for Bronwen. It's a combination question. So what are the different environmental concerns of deep sea mining relative to existing offshore mining of diamonds, gold in Alaska? So I guess those are seabed mines, but they're not as deep, right, Bronwen?
Yeah, deep sea mining, as I said, is defined as 200 meters and deeper, down to thousands of meters. A lot of these present mining activities that are going on, be it for diamonds, tin mining in the Coral Triangle, the conglomerate mining, I would say that they have gradually taken place without really the intensive scrutiny that should have happened. And one certainly can't say they don't have impacts, but often these impacts are simply not measured, or being in shallower waters, it's much easier to not to monitor it so much, but I don't think it has been properly monitored to date. And there are some, I don't know about the Alaskan stuff, but certainly a lot more could have been monitored environmentally for some of the other mining, and some of it has caused a lot of trouble. If I think about the tin mining in the Coral Triangle, I mean, that has displaced fishers, and then they turn to mining, and this has led to all sorts of crimes that I've heard of in the first day of this conference. So I think that, you know, when we talk of mining in the sea, we're really excluding people being directly involved, and so we have to think in this indirect way of what are the waterways, what services do they provide, and what is actually being done to the water, rather than the bottom, the sea bottom, which is mainly what's received attention in the shallow mining to date. And I'm really glad to hear that so much emphasis is being put now on water rather than the seabed and the life there. That's important too, but I think the water aspect is far more critical for us as humankind.
Now, it's my understanding that in the De Beers operations off of Namibia, very, very few people have even been able to see what's happening there outside of De Beers and the Namibian government. Is that correct?
Yes. You know, there's huge security around the diamonds. I think the reason given is that for security reasons, there is not access to those areas. They're completely cut off where this is happening. What I would like to really see, I would like to see some water column monitoring. I know that they monitor for the seabed activities. They do monitor the life on the seabed, but I haven't seen anything to do with the water column monitoring. And again, you know, it's not only processing wastes that are necessary. When you are unearthing sediments, you're exposing all sorts of compounds there that have been safely buried, and these can really contaminate the water above and be carried around. So to answer your question, no, it's really difficult to access that. They give out their public reports, but as a scientist, it would be really nice to see the actual data.
And there doesn't seem to be any yet. I know we've gone digging for it and can't find it. Mm-hmm. So in our last few moments, what I'd really like from each of you is some form of call to action. What would you like us as an industry to do, or what do you believe that we as an industry could do to be most impactful on your area of concern? Yep. And you can go in any order, or I can pick on you, whichever.
Okay, shall I start? One thing that I'd like to mention is that with this whole debate and this part of deep sea mining that hasn't started yet, is that a great many countries are putting moratoriums on deep sea mining, or they're putting outright bans on seabed mining in their own EEZs. And also some, you know, the electric cars, there's this, as we've said, there's this thrust to get more and more of the rare metals. Some companies like BMW and I think Volvo have said they will not source these metals from deep sea mining activities. So that's one way of voicing hesitation or caution for the deep sea mining activity.
Excellent. So pressure to industry to disincentivize them from extracting from the seafloor. Daniel,
So yeah, I can go next. So I think that there's lots and lots of choices now. If you're someone that sources metals for craft, for art, for improving the human condition through beauty and lots of other great things, and there's plenty of sources of responsibly mined and minerals that will create a fairness in society. So we have fair mined gold, we have fair trade gold, we have Moyo gems, we have lots and lots of different examples of artisanal small scale miners coming together as cooperatives, producing responsible minerals and materials that can then be sold to markets. And that it doesn't cost that much more, especially when you're trying to create a product which has an ethic at its heart, right? So my message would be to find out and locate those responsibly produced minerals and materials, because minerals, I'm a geologist, minerals are wonderful and great. And if we pay some good attention to how they're produced and find ways of producing them that are responsible, then they can contribute to the livelihoods of the miners and the lifestyles of the consumers in ways that improve the human condition.
And that's so important. We have an internal debate many times within the industry. Recycled metals are bad because bad metal can make it into the supply chain through the refineries. Any mining is bad. We should only be going to recycled metals because mining is bad. And those are not only polarizing arguments, but they're not productive. Refineries can be certified as clean, and we can trace where their metal came from. And less minerals mined equals less waste. More responsibly minerals mined means people eat. So, when they feed their communities at the artisanal mine sites. It's like all of these things that we can do add up to better behavior and better results for the world. Anyway, Marcelo, what's your call to action?
I have two calls to action. The first one, listen and act, as you can read here. And the second one, as NGOs have been struggling to find solutions for this complex issue in the Amazon. And this year, WWF decided to support market solutions. So we are going to establish links from mine to markets. And it's not so easy to get companies engaged here in Brazil. So I called the companies that are worried about this issue to get in contact, and you can help us to start a pilot on traceability using.
We've lost your sound, Marcelo. Can you check?
Yes, using science and having support of university here in Brazil that has worked on this issue. Here's my email, so get in contact and let's work together for a solution.
Absolutely. So there's a lot we can do. There's just a lot we can do as an industry and as individuals to help move the needle. None of us individually can make a huge impact, but as groups, we can make an impact. If you look in the chat, there's a lot of discussion around cooperatives being formed. We heard from our responsible jewelry designers in the last panel about the choices they make, and together we can respond to these calls to action and start to move the needle on water. So I want to thank each of you, Daniel, Bronwen, and Marcelo, for coming and spending time with us today. Bronwen, I'm sure you're ready to go to bed. Thank you for staying with us so late into the night and sharing your very new perspective with many of us, because we haven't been looking at deep sea mining. Daniel, I hope you have a great day ahead of you now that you got up extra early to join us. And that your information about dry stacking in the tailing ponds, I think that's something else that we can look at, bringing more pressure in the industry. So, and then of course us, starting to carry forward our example of Roman times giving us pollution that we're still dealing with today. Maybe that will make an impact on people. And Marcelo, those images of the Amazon are just devastating. I really want to encourage everyone to go to the World Wildlife Federation website, look at those maps, and let's all pay attention to where our products are coming from. and the impact that is caused when they're extracted. So thank you, everyone. Folks, we have another really great session at 3:30 on diamond certification with SCS Global. So I hope you'll go to the networking area and talk to each other for a moment and then join us back here in 15 minutes.